Continuing the presentation on workplace safety at construction sites, we now look at the hierarchy of control. Some control measures are more effective than others. Control measures can be ranked from the highest level of protection and reliability to the lowest. This ranking is known as the hierarchy of control. First is eliminating the risk. Then, if this can't be done, try minimising the risk by using control measures such as substitution, isolation, and engineering controls. Next, you can minimise the risk using administrative controls. Then, if the risk persists, use personal protective equipment, or more commonly known as PPE. And finally, a combination of controls. And we will go through examples of each of these now. Eliminating risks means removing the hazard or hazardous work practice from the workplace. This is the most effective control measure and must always be considered before anything else. For example, eliminate the risk of a fall from a height by doing the work at ground level. If elimination of the risk is not reasonably practicable, you must consider using substitution, isolation or engineering controls, or a combination of control measures to minimise the risk. Substitution is replacing a hazard or hazardous work practice with a less hazardous one. An example is substituting a manual task of carrying tools from one level to another with a material hoist or crane. This will minimise the risk of workers developing musculoskeletal disorder. Another example of substitution is replacing a two-part epoxy substance with a water-based acrylic waterproofing system, which will minimise the exposure to a hazardous substance. Another example of substitution is replacing an ordinary brick cutting saw blade with a noise-reducing saw blade, and this will minimise the exposure to hazardous noise. Isolation is minimising the risk by isolating hazardous work practices from people. For example, isolating a mobile plant work zone from workers or the public with a physical barrier will minimise the risk of contact occurring between a person and the mobile plant. Engineering controls are physical control measures to minimise risk. An example here is shoring, battering, or benching and excavation. And this will minimise the risk of the person being trapped or minimise the risk of the excavation from collapsing. Administrative controls, these are policies and procedures on the construction site, such as when you may only have a certain amount of workers or activities in one area at a time. Other examples of administrative controls are the construction industry white card. This restricts who has access to construction sites. Also, using a keep out sign and a person to secure an exclusion zone when dismantling scaffolding minimises the risk of people entering the work area and being struck by a falling object. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, is the lowest order control measure in the hierarchy of controls. PPE should only be considered when other higher order control measures are not reasonably practicable or to increase protection from the hazard. PPE relies on the proper fit and use of the PPE and does nothing to change the hazard itself. It requires thorough training and effective supervision to ensure compliance and effectiveness. Just examples of PPE here. So if you're working under the sun, you've got a wide brim hat and use of hard hat as well. And you've also got sunblock. And you've also got sunglasses. And you also have high visibility vests. Now we consider the combination of control measures, which comes after going through all the other hierarchy, the remainder of the hierarchy of control. Now, the first example here is to manage the risk of a fall when a worker is removing or roofing on a building under demolition. Control measures may include determining whether the roof can be demolished from the ground, that's elimination. If this is not reasonably practicable, minimise the risk of a fall by substitution, which is building a scaffolding platform underneath the roof. Isolation, by installing a perimeter fence to keep unauthorised persons from the construction site. Engineering control is working off scissor lifts or elevated work platforms. Then you consider administrative controls, which is implement a procedure that prohibits work near open edges. And then use a safety harness, which is an example of a personal protective equipment. Another example of a combination of control measures is when managing the risk of persons working in the same area from being struck by a mobile plant. Control measures may include substitution by using traffic lights instead of a traffic controller. Traffic controller is often known as lollipop people because they hold up the stop sign. Substitution, that's replacing an item of mobile plant which has restricted field of vision to one that has a clear field of vision. Another substitution is using a zero tail swing excavators rather than conventional tail swing excavators. You could isolate by segregating the work processes through distance and time. You have an engineering control by installing collision avoidance technology when the vehicle is reversing. You have an administrative control by developing and implementing a traffic management plan for any traffic control being carried out. And you could use high visibility vests as an example of PBE. Now, visible here on the board are safety management plans. The control measures that are put in place to protect health and safety should be regularly reviewed to make sure they are effective. Reviewing the control measures also involves considering whether a higher order control measure is now reasonably practicable. For example, there could be advances in technology that allow risks to be eliminated, perhaps using a robot to do a job that was previously done by a person. Control measures must be reviewed and, if necessary, revised when the control measure is not effective in controlling the risk. This needs to happen before a change at the workplace that is likely to give rise to a new or different health and safety risk that the control measure may not effectively control, or if a new hazard or risk is identified, or if the results of consultation indicate that a review is necessary, or if a health and safety representative requests a review. And that completes our overview of the concept of construction workplace safety.